Morning, everybody. I hope everyone's joining successfully. We'll get going in a moment. I can see we've got around about 40 participants so far, so we're just waiting for a couple more. So then we'll get going because I'm sure we all can't wait to hear from our expert panel this morning. So you've got about a minute if you want to grab a quick drink, a quick cuppa, and then we'll get going because I know we've got a lot to get through from our expert lineup today. Okay, the numbers are coming up. Okay, I think we'll make a start. So welcome, good morning, everybody. My name's Kelly Henderson, and I'm the chair of the session today. And obviously today's session is Pets Make a Home, the benefits of keeping pets in rented accommodation. And we've got, as I say, a great lineup. But just before we get started on the session and hearing from the speakers, we are recording the session today. So obviously just bear that in mind, and you will get a copy of the recording afterwards and lots of information afterwards as well. I know that Gareth is going to send on some information in a couple of days' time. As well, we've got a Q&A session. So if you don't get your kind of a chance to have your question answered, we will be very happy to send on the questions to our panel of speakers today, and we will provide a response to that as well. So, you know, there's two bites of the cherry, as the saying goes. Just as well, while we're kind of getting introduced, etc., today's session, we will be talking about domestic abuse. So just to bear that in mind, that obviously you might feel traumatized if you've experienced domestic abuse or grown up in a household with domestic abuse. So just to bear that in mind, that will be part of the discussion today. Okay. So, as I mentioned, I'm Kelly Henderson, and I'm here today chairing this session. The webinar today has been hosted by the Collaborative Centre for Housing Evidence, or CASH. I'm much happier to say CASH, otherwise it's quite a mouthful, isn't it? And it's part of their diversity, equity and inclusion work. And I don't know about many of you today, but I've been to quite a few of those sessions, and they're always really informative and do great work to engage different people across the housing sector and actually outside of the housing sector as well. And they look to support marginalised groups who face barriers and discrimination across kind of sectors and do something about that. So definitely worthwhile having a look at the website. I know Gareth would want me to say that. So definitely there's loads of great work there. So have a look. And today's webinar is kind of twofold in a way. We've got Tom talking about his research, and then we've got Cats Protection talking about kind of their work as well. So as I say, in a way, it's kind of twofold. So we're talking about keeping pets in rented accommodation, but also looking at kind of the impact of pets as a barrier to leaving domestic abuse as well, and what can be done about that. And certainly from my time as a housing officer, I've certainly, and working in domestic abuse frontline as well, I've certainly seen the impact of kind of the worry and the concern about pets if you are a victim survivor of domestic abuse, and kind of thinking, well, what will I do? What will happen? Also in terms of rented accommodation, homeless people thinking, well, actually, I can't take that hostel place. I can't take up that tenancy because they won't allow my cat, dog, whatever as well. So I think it is something that if you work in housing that you will have come across. So today's session obviously ties those two things together in a session with our speakers today. I've already mentioned the session will be recorded and slide shared afterwards. And I just wanted to add as well that if, like me, you want to make a donation to the Cats Protection, we are going to send the link on, and I think we are going to pop in the link for the charity in the chat as well, if you feel that you would like to do that as well. Okay. So questions for our brilliant lineup of speakers today can be submitted through the Q&A. I was originally saying the chat, but actually there's a Q&A box, so pop your questions in there, and we're going to hear from both sets of speakers, and then we'll have the questions and answers after that, if that sounds okay to everybody. And the session will end at 11:30. Okay. So I hope that sounds okay to everybody. As I say, you're going to get, if there's anything that we haven't covered in terms of questions, please do know that your questions will be picked up and will be answered. So Just a quick reminder again, we are talking about domestic abuse as part of this session. If you feel you need to leave the session, please do so. You can watch the recording afterwards as well. So I'm going to start off with our first brilliant speaker, and that is Tom Simcock. And Tom is going to share his latest research with us. And just I hope everybody has had a chance to read the bios of our brilliant speakers today. So Tom is a research fellow and research manager of the Healthy Housing Initiative at the University of Huddersfield. And Tom's also a chartered psychologist, and he's actually chair of the Housing Studies Association. So not busy at all, Tom. So there's kind of lots of different hats on there, Tom. And I think this research is something that I'm really, really eager to learn much more about. And I'm sure we'll have lots of questions. So Tom has, I'm just checking the time, Tom has 20 minutes to kind of go through the research, but please do, as I say, have a look at the bios of our speakers, but also have a look at kind of Tom's other wider work as well. And I'm sure there's kind of a lot of interest that'll come from that as well, Tom. So I'll hand over to Tom, who will share his presentation, and I'll pop myself on mute before I forget.
Thank you, Callie. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone can see the screen, the showing the slides. Getting a few nods, so that's all fantastic. So the project we did was called the financial impact of pet ownership in the private rent sector, and this is funded by Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. Hopefully this, as we go through, just a quick introduction to the project team. So it was myself, Dr. Lindsay McCarthy at Crazer at Sheffield Hallam University, my colleague Al Picara is Professor of Banking and Finance at Brunel University, London, and Phil Brown at Huddersfield with myself as well. So, very brief overview in terms of some of the background to this issue. So the private rented sector has grown considerably over the last 20 years and provides approximately housing to 1 in 5 households. So, and that's now stayed around consistently since around 2016. But renters are staying longer in the private rented sector due to difficulties in accessing other tenures, the challenges and lack of supply of social housing, and then an ability to sort of get onto the home ownership ladder. Previous research has underscored the challenges renters experience, such as financial pressures, insecurity, especially in England around Section 21, no-fault evictions, and precarity, and then also issues of disrepair. And due to, as I said, those limited housing options and insecurity, renters face barriers in making their property a home. There's a lot of literature that I'm not going to go into today around the benefits of having a place as a home rather than just a house or a roof over your head. But one of those core aspects that we found in previous research for being able to make a home for renters is about the freedom. And I think that's around that freedom and ability to have a pet. And so all of this has created quite a bit of political pressure for change in private renter sectors. We've had the Renters Reform Bill in England, which unfortunately, due to the general election, hasn't been made it through. And then there's the Housing Scotland Bill in Scotland as well that's recently been introduced. And that's going to go through that process as well. And within both those bills, there was options for encouraging greater pet ownership in private rent sectors. Whether they'll be successful, that's a different question. So let's go straight into the project. Our study employed a mixed method approach across 3 distinct phases, and just say Battersea really wanted us to try and undertake the most comprehensive piece of research on pet ownership in the private rent sector, and we kept that in mind throughout this. So firstly, it was about the development of a model of the costs and benefits of renting to pet owners. And part of the reason for the research was that there's a lot of concern from sort of the property sector that pets cause damage, and that is one of the key reasons why landlords are unwilling to let renters with pets. So we developed a model of the costs and benefits by undertaking different assessments, and I'll come along to that in a second. And then we undertook a primary data collection with both private landlords and private renters to build on that model and get some primary data for primary cost benefit analysis of renting to pet owners for private landlords. So just to say about our rapid evidence assessment, this is a systematic form of an evidence review, and we developed a robust framework and followed the PRISMA guidelines for the systematic reviews in this as well. Just to say, this is our search process, and we were looking at all the different databases and looking at grey literature. We identified 51 records for the review as well. And I'm not going to go into that in detail, but you can use this QR code to find our published journal article in the International Journal of Housing Policy on the rapid evidence review as well. And what I think is important just to say is that we integrated findings from this evidence review into a new typology of the costs and benefits to landlords of renting to pet owners, which I'll now share with you. So in terms of the costs that we found across the existing literature on this topic, firstly, the cost was around pet-related damage, complaints, noise, and conflict, additional time management, and insurance premiums. So they're the four main costs that we found in the literature. In the benefits, we found that there was improved landlord-tenant interactions, long-term tenancies, lower vacancy rates, lower marketing costs, higher rental income for landlords, which is quite I think a positive thing for private landlords in terms of for them in looking at their portfolio, stronger community ties, and then improved tenant well-being as well. So that was in terms of our basis for the next bit of primary data collection that we undertook for this piece of research. So using those models of costs and benefits framework, we designed two surveys. The surveys were designed to collect a broad range of information on the costs and benefits and broader experiences such as pet damage, how it was paid for, the length of tenure, the void periods, and the relationship between the landlord and renter. So for the total sample size, the landlord survey was 2,115 adults, and we identified similar characteristics in comparison to the English private landlord survey. And the total sample size for the private renter survey was 1,016 adults. But I think it's important just to say that we collected data on the last tenancy that ended for the survey of private landlords. And this was to enable a comparison between landlords who rent to pet owners and non-pet owners, but also those landlords who might have only one property, but also 10 properties. And if we're trying to collect data, we've only got a certain number of questions. We need a benchmark then to go for those landlords who've got 10 properties. What is a comparable benchmark between those different properties across different portfolios? However, this method might actually inherently introduce a bias towards more negative findings as we focus on capturing the experiences of tenancies that have already concluded, rather than this might underrepresent ongoing successful tenancies and those more positive landlord and tenant relationships. So it's just an important note, and I think it'll come up in some of the findings going forward as well. And then finally, our phase 3 was a cost benefit analysis following a procedure described by Boardman itself. And this is in the full report, so you won't have to we won't go into too much detail about this as well. So let's look at some of the experiences of pet ownership in the private rent sector. In terms of the proportion of pet rentals in our samples, in our renter survey, 44% of renters report having pets, of which 88% said that the landlord had allowed them to keep the pet either at the start or during the tenancy, but 10%, 1 in 10 renters said that they were keeping their pet a secret. What really surprised us was that 3/4 of landlords report that they had previously rented to a pet owner. And some of these, it is a multiple choice in terms of the types of pet. But small dogs, small to medium dogs was one of the most common, followed by cats at 48% of landlords. In terms of the relationships between landlords and renters, the blue columns are pet owning renters and the red columns are renters without pets. As you can see here, most pet owning renters were more likely to feel at home in the property and feel part of the local community compared to renters without pets. But a higher proportion of pet owners report feeling anxious about raising repair concerns to the landlord or letting agent. And that links into that issues of insecurity and precarity that I talked about at the very start as well, around raising those issues. And that also then has an effect on the private landlord in terms of if there is a repair concern, is it being addressed at an earlier enough stage that maybe it isn't costing you as much as well. In terms of pet damage, 3 out of 4 landlords, representing 76% of respondents, report they did not encounter any damage caused by pets in their rental properties. So it's, you know, a huge amount of landlords saying there wasn't any damage. And in terms of the renters, 9 out of 10 pet owning renters didn't experience pet damage either. To really get into some of the data through this project, we created levels of pet damage to sort of assess whether it was either no damage on different types, minor damage around small, normal, expected signs of use and aging, more really wear and tear rather than minor damage, moderate types of damage, and then major types of damage as well. And what we did was we asked landlords if they could provide sort of types, details about types of pet-related damage against the scale as well. And what we can see is really where damage is occurring, it is of minor sort of the wear and tear sort of level of damage or moderate level of damage. And that's sort of consistent across all types of the damage that we asked, types of damage we asked against. In terms of how pet damage was covered, the cost, 77% of landlords told us that the cost was either covered by the deposit or the renter with no loss to the landlord. So if landlords were saying there was damage, you know, it's not actually caused, in the majority of cases, it's not causing a loss to the landlord at all. And the average cost of pet-related damage was reported to be £300. So what does this mean about damage? Well, the pet damage is not a regular occurrence and occurs in a minority of tenancies. If pet damage does occur, the majority of cases are minor or moderate damage. And where pet damage does occur, in the majority of cases, the landlord doesn't bear the cost of the damage at all. We did find that just over half of landlords report they did not charge us a pet surcharge, 51%, but of those that did, it ranged between £1 to £50 a month as well, which I think is important for us to going forward, just thinking about the fairness in terms of pet rents, and especially those for different groups who might find challenges in accessing the private rent sector or may need to move quickly. In terms of length of tenure, what we found is for the landlord survey, this is where there's issues around that inherent bias comes into, and it doesn't really reflect the data we know from the English Housing Survey. But for the length of tenure reported by renters, we find that renters with pets were more likely to stay longer than renters without pets. And as you can see here, when examining previous tenancy, where the renter had been in the current tenancy for less than 12 months, 50% of pet-owning renters had stayed in their previous home for more than 3 years, compared with 31% of non-pet-owning renters. So it's suggesting that pet-owning renters are more likely to stay longer in the properties where renters without pets, that there seems to be more short-term churn throughout the sector. For the Renters Reform Bill, of those renters currently without pet, less than 1 in 3 report that the landlord was pet-friendly. If the landlord would allow pets, 32% would consider getting a pet, and 21% were unsure. Nearly 1 in 3 renters would consider getting a pet if the Renters Reform Bill had been passed, but 9% wouldn't consider this. So about 1 in 10 renters wouldn't consider this because they believe their landlord is still not allowed a pet. What we found was that broader policies and initiatives to support landlords considering pet-friendly rentals was around, firstly, requiring tenants to hold insurance to cover damage, even if it is of a minority of cases. Just over half of landlords reported that would support them to consider pet-friendly rentals, but also around changes to the Tenant Fee Act, around deep cleaners fumigations at the end of the property, but also around the taking of a pet deposit as well. So moving on to our cost-benefit analysis, I think just to really start off with is we're going to talk about what's called the net present value. And in cost-benefit analysis, this is a financial concept used to evaluate the profitability of an investment or project over time. Really, this just tells us whether the benefits of an investment outweigh its costs by considering the value of the money over time. So if it's a positive NPV, that suggests that the benefits exceed the costs, suggesting that it's a good thing to do. On the other hand, a negative net present value suggests that costs outweigh the benefits, which might not be worthwhile. So our cost benefit analysis looked at these monetary benefits that we're able to identify, so the additional rent, where we found that landlords can earn an average annual surcharge of around £349.20 per year. Cost savings from long-term tenancies, so this is around £44 per rental period, and there's additional tax benefits as well through additional insurance premiums or other expenses where landlords can claim that back as well. In terms of the costs, we identified an average cost of £16.50 at the end of a tenancy due to pet damage. So this is based on the probability of the damage occurring, which we found that is in the minority of cases, and the actual average cost as well. We identified that cleaning fumigation costs, potential increased wear and tear. We also, based on probabilities of cost of dealing with pet behaviours and complaints, also evictions as well. And we identified a 10% increase in insurance premiums as well. And this is what we get in terms of our cost benefit analysis, which is in the full report. So please do have a look within that report. But over our 12-year period that we analysed for, there is 3 rental periods of each of 4 years. And over all of that period, we identify a net present value of 3,800, so a positive. So in our analysis, we also adjusted for interest rates and inflation, both set at 3% per annum. And as I said, our total present value for the entire analysis period is at 3,800, which is a positive, which suggests that, that it is worthwhile for private landlords to do this. I think it's important just not to get lost in that actual monetary value, because this figure means that renting to pet owners is no different to other renters, but also has benefits, but it's not what a private landlord is going to expect for their own tenancy. It's more of an estimation across the whole sector. So what are our conclusions and recommendations? So our conclusions, just renting to pet owners is financially beneficial to private landlords. Pets are not a major risk for landlords. As I said, pet damage, it occurs in a minority of cases, and where it's more likely to be minor damage, and in the majority of cases, there is no loss to the private landlord as well. Pet owners tend to stay longer in the property, which then reduces churn and costs for landlords as well. But pet-friendly properties can be more expensive for renters, but at the same time, pet ownership can foster a good relationship between renters and landlords. Pet owners tend to feel more at home in the rented properties, but pet owners do face challenges in finding a pet-friendly property. Hours in the Renters Reform Bill were crucial for encouraging pet-friendly renting, and it's sort of imperative that the future government does pick that up and take that forward to support the private rental sector and pet owners in the sector as well. And just 5 key recommendations from themselves was implementation of the Renters Reform Bill. One, to reduce that insecurity through Section 21, but also ensure that pet owners are encouraged, private landlords are encouraged to take on pet-friendly properties. And other devolved governments should consider new rules to support pet-friendly rentals. We do need to ensure there are routes for dispute resolution and redress where those relationships do break down. And we do need to break down barriers to affordable and fair pet-friendly rentals. But finally, I think cultural change is necessary to really address this, and changing the hearts and minds of private landlords to encourage those pet-friendly rentals is really key for this going forward. So where next, I think, for us is just looking at the unintended impact of Renters Reform Bill or similar measures, if they are enacted, on groups identified in our evidence review, such as those on low incomes, and we saw those trying to escape domestic violence and being able to sort of secure that insurance for their pet as well. But we also need to examine the broader barriers to supporting pet-friendly rentals, such as the affordability around that surcharge, but also the fairness of insurance and pet surcharges. Is it fair that pet owners should have to pay more in both that insurance and surcharge for having a pet for where they want to live as well? So if you want to read our reports, you can follow this QR code, and I'll put a link in the chat as well for you. And I think that is it from me.
Thank you so much, Tom. Excellent. So obviously a lot of information in there. So please do have a look at the report, which is going to be sent on by Gareth afterwards. So Dr. Tom Simcock as I've already mentioned, at the University of Sheffield. So please take a look in more detail. And there will be a chance to ask Dr. Simcock questions in the Q&A. We had an issue where somebody couldn't access the QR code, but people are going to be getting that anyway. So I think there was obviously a lot to think about. And then I suppose from my point of view, as the managing director of addressing domestic abuse, a lot of the work that we do is around domestic abuse, working with social landlords, and quite a lot of the time, and working with survivors of domestic abuse, and quite a lot of the time we hear that somebody can't access get on the social housing register, so their only option is the private rented sector. So I think there was just so much in there to think about, and I've certainly learned a lot by that. And I thought when you talked about the kind of strong community ties, I thought that was really, really interesting, and the well-being, obviously, I think that's going to be of kind of much interest. And I'll certainly, in the work that I do as addressing domestic abuse, I will certainly be sharing your report widely. So thank you so much, and for keeping to time as well. Brilliant, excellent. And we next have our next presentation. So we've got Natalie Ratcliffe, who's worked at Cats Protection Lifeline since early 2023. She first launched the service in East Anglia and then recently led the service into Scotland. We've got Alice Palombo, Advocacy and Government Relations Officer for Scotland and Northern Ireland. And she's, in the last 3 years, done a lot of work around influencing politicians in Westminster. And then we've got Amy Hyde, who is the Lifeline Service Manager at Cats Protection, and she's been delivering specialist pet fostering services to survivors of domestic abuse for the last 12 years. I would say as well, please do have a look at their bios as well. There's obviously a lot of information in there as well, and this is just kind of a quick introduction. So we're going to have the presentation next from Amy, Alice and Natalie. And again, just a reminder that we are going to be talking about domestic abuse. So I just wanted to give that trigger warning before Cats Protection presentation. So I'll pop myself on mute. And I don't think we can yet. I think we're about to see the presenters. So thank you very much. I'll put myself on mute.
Ellie. So I'm Alice Palombo. I'm the Advocacy Officer for Cats Protection. And for anyone that doesn't know Cats Protection, we are the UK's largest cat welfare charity, and we help 400 cats a day. I'm just going to echo what Kelly said and give you a bit of a trigger warning. We're going to be discussing domestic abuse and animal abuse. And as Kelly said at the beginning, this is recorded. So if you feel that you need to step out and you want to watch the recording afterwards, please feel that you can do that. Amy is operating the slides, so can I get the next slide, please? I'm going to start by talking about Cats Protection's work in housing. So one of the top reasons that cats come into our care is because of landlords. The equivalent of 3 cats a day come into our care because landlords don't allow pets. In 2018, we launched the Purrfect Landlords campaign, and this was a way to encourage landlords to allow pets. We started this with a survey. So we looked at renting with pets, and this was both the private and social sector. We found that social landlords are more likely to allow pets because they recognise the benefits for tenants. So what we do with the Purrfect Landlords campaign is we work with social housing providers to make sure they have responsible pet policies. So this will include making sure that cats are neutered, and this will stop cat hoarding and unwanted pregnancies. With private landlords, very unsurprisingly, especially because what Tom was saying, there is a real lack of pet-friendly rented homes. In 2021, we updated our survey results. So we did a survey with Dogs Trust, and we looked at renting in the private sector with all different types of pets. And we found that, yes, again, there is a lack of pet-friendly rented homes, and 46% of private landlords say they will allow pets, and only 9% of pet owners said their properties were advertised as pet friendly. I'm going to go through some top line results from that survey, but there's not going to be too many of them, and I'll pop in the chat a link to more of those results. So one of the main barriers to people renting with pets is blanket no pet policies. So this is when in a contract it says no pets. And we found from the 2021 survey of Dogs Trust, a third of landlords reported they did not allow pets because that was the default position within their contract. And then as we've gone through doing our Perfect Landlords campaign, we found that you need to go a bit further than cultural change, as Tom was saying. So some landlords, you can encourage them to try and allow pets if you speak to them. However, we found 33% of landlords who do not currently allow pets in any of their properties said nothing would persuade them to do so. So that's why Cats Protection are calling for the government to introduce ways to encourage landlords to allow pets. Can I get the next slide, please? So other ways that we try and encourage landlords to allow pets is through the Cat CV. And the Cat CV is quite an effective way that we try and work with tenants. So if anyone comes to us and say, my landlord won't allow me to keep a pet, or sometimes clients through our Lifeline service will say, please use the Cat CV. And this is a bit of a way to make it a bit more personal. So your landlord isn't just saying, oh, there's a cat, I don't really want a cat to rent with me. You're saying, this is the name of my cat, this is a photo of my cat, this is my cat's behavior. Maybe you can have a photo of your cat on a scratching post and a previous landlord reference, and it just makes it a bit more personable. And we found this is a really effective tool to encourage landlords to allow pets. And a bit going back to what Tom was saying, this is a bit of the cultural change here. So it becomes not just a pet, it's someone's cat, and it makes it quite nice. Can I get the next slide, please? Thank you. I'm going to talk very quickly about what is happening across the UK in terms of housing legislation. Tom's already touched on the Renters Reform Bill. For anyone that doesn't know about the Renters Reform Bill, this was introduced in Westminster, and it was going to allow tenants to request a pet from their landlord, and the landlord couldn't unreasonably refuse the request. However, because of the general election, this was dropped. Cats Protection is calling for similar legislation to be brought forward in the next Parliament. And so hopefully this will happen. In England, they have gone a couple of steps further in terms of housing. So in 2021, they amended the Model Tenancy Agreement. So this effectively ended blanket no pet policies. So instead, now consent for pets is the default position for anyone that uses the Model Tenancy Agreement. So now a tenant can request a pet from their landlord, and the landlord has to reply within 28 days and give a good reason why they can't keep a pet. So this was a big step forward back in 2021. In Wales, all landlords have to register with the government, and they do this through Rent Smart. We know that the government aren't looking to introduce any legislation to encourage landlords to keep pets. However, they've been engaging with stakeholders such as Cats Protection to try and think of ways to encourage landlords to keep pets. So we're currently working with them to create a bundle that they can send landlords. So this will include some of our survey results, and a lot of our survey results back up what Tom was just saying, how the majority of pet owners don't create damage, and tenants who rent are more likely to stay in the property for longer. So we're bundling all that up, and we're also going to bundle it with some of our sample policies from contractual policies that we've created in our Perfect Landlord campaign, and we're going to send this all out to landlords to try and encourage them to proactively allow tenants within their properties. And this is all going out through the Welsh Government via Rent Smart. In Northern Ireland, unfortunately, there's not been a lot of work through this. And currently, through the Model Tenancy Agreement, consent is a default position. However, we're still campaigning on this. In Scotland, they've recently introduced the Housing Scotland Bill. So there's been a lot of work around this. The Housing Bill introduces a right for tenants to keep pets. A landlord cannot unreasonably refuse this request. They've got 42 days to consider it, and then they have to respond. This is a great achievement. We're very excited about this at Cats Protection because 1,300 of our supporters responded to the consultation about the bill, calling for cat-friendly rented homes. You can see here this beautiful cat here. So that was great. And Also within the housing bill, something that we really welcome is that all social housing providers have to have a domestic abuse policy. So Cats for Protection is calling for it to signpost to services such as Lifeline. So I've mentioned Lifeline a few times now, and you're probably wondering what it is. I'm going to hand over to Natalie, who's going to talk to you a bit about Lifeline.
Thank you, Alice. That's great. So I'll be giving you a little bit of an introduction just to some of the links between domestic abuse and pets, and then I will just pass over to Amy, who'll talk a little bit more in detail about the specialist pet fostering services that are available to support people in that situation. So sadly, we do know that domestic abuse is incredibly common. We know that a really large number of people experiencing domestic abuse will also have pets as well. So if you consider sort of how many of you today maybe have pets, have friends or family members that have pets in the home, we know it's incredibly common. We are a nation of animal lovers. And we also know that each year, nearly 2 million people in the UK will suffer some form of domestic abuse. So really, if we start to think about those numbers, that intersection between pet owners and domestic abuse survivors becomes really prevalent, and that's really where we work. So we do recognise that domestic abuse is a gendered crime in its nature, but our services support absolutely anybody of any gender because it doesn't discriminate. And we do also know that domestic abuse is incredibly underreported as well. So a lot of the statistics that you'll see up on the slides today are likely in reality going to be a lot higher. We know there's a really strong link between abuse to animals and abuse to people, which I'll come on to in a little bit more detail shortly. But perpetrators will often start abusing pets and they may well then go on to abuse people. But we do also see it the other way around, in which perpetrators will be subjecting people to abuse and then they'll start to bring animals into that. And that's something that we'll explore a little bit more shortly. So just to highlight some of the statistics on the slide, Endeavour, who we'll hear a little bit more about with Amy, is a domestic abuse service that we work closely with, and they did find that 75% of those who have family pets have had violence used against them as a threat or as a means of control. So we do know that this could be affecting a really large proportion of survivors. And I'm just going to very quickly highlight the Domestic Abuse Act 2021. So I'm sure most of you are aware that this is sort of the main piece of legislation that's in place in England and Wales at the moment. We know that animal abuse is a strategy of coercive control. It's used by perpetrators, and it is also an act of animal cruelty. So both of those crimes do carry a maximum prison sentence of 5 years. We were really glad to see that pets are getting included in the statutory guidance. It's really reflecting what I've mentioned in the previous slide, but also what we see on our services day to day as well. So just to really highlight that we have now got reflected in the legislation in England and Wales, using animals to control or coerce a victim, using violence or threats towards assistance dogs and pets to intimidate and cause distress, and technology facilitated abuse as well, which is a huge one for us, and we're seeing more and more of. Obviously, advances in technology and things like that are amazing and have lots of benefits, but sadly, in the wrong hands, they can also be incredibly dangerous. And we do see pets brought into that as well. So it's something, yeah, that we see on our services fairly frequently. And again, similar in the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act in 2018, we do see pets mentioned there as well. So it is really encouraging to start to see them getting included actually within the legislation as well. And I'm just going to give a really quick couple of highlights from a piece of research that we'll often use within our training sessions. And it is a study done by Dr. Mary Wakeham, who is the founder of one of our partner services, Refuge for Pets, which operates down in Devon and Cornwall. Mary, in her previous life, was an IDFA, so worked very closely with domestic abuse survivors, supporting them. And she then went on to do her PhD into looking at how animals were used as a tool for coercive control by domestic abuse perpetrators. So again, any of you who have pets at home or are animal lovers, then you'll know that incredible bond that people have with their animals. And I just wanted to highlight one of the quotes from the participants that Mary spoke to within her study, who I thought just summed it up really great in a really nice way. She speaks about how she had a dog and she was amazing. She said she's got children, but she was our little baby. And she was the one that really got her through during and after that she left that abusive person. So there is a really wide body of academic and practice research that sort of discusses the benefits of relationships between humans and animals, and it's something that Amy will touch on later in the session as well. But it is something anecdotally we see absolutely every day on the services. We know that animals, you know, if you've had a bad day and you come home and your dog or your cat is there to give you a bit of a cuddle, you know that feeling that you'll get from that. So particularly if actually home isn't a safe place for you and you're going through that trauma, having that animal and that support system by you can mean a huge amount to people. And the other thing we really see is how animals were used within the abuse and brought in to coerce and control survivors. So this is quite a hard-hitting quote. So I will just sort of let you read it in your own time. But this is from one of the other participants from Mary's study who spoke about her experience of how her tropical fish, which any of you who have kept them or know anyone who keeps them will know that incredibly take up a huge amount of time and resource. It's a very high maintenance animal to upkeep really, and to make sure that environment is absolutely right for them. And she'd nurtured them from a really, really young age. So 56% of the participants of Mary's study disclosed that their animals had experienced multiple forms of abuse. And the highest of that was at 70% with physical abuse. And really tragically, 14% had experienced their pets being killed as well. And again, that is something that we'll sadly see on our service. We also found from the study that that dogs and cats were actually the highest risk of being harmed as well in those situations. I also just wanted to highlight another quote from one of the participants of Mary's study that I thought just really nicely basically summed up how perpetrators will exploit that bond between victim survivors and their pets. And when asked, why do you think he acted the way he did towards her? The participant replied, because she loved me unconditionally and I loved her, and he just couldn't stand that bond. So if we argued, he'd kick her. She was tiny and he was a big guy. And he would just look at me, look at her, and I knew exactly what he meant and I knew he was going to go for her. So you can really imagine actually how much guilt and shame as well is put on the survivor in that situation, having to watch something you care so deeply about actually suffering as well. And again, we go into this in a huge amount more detail in our other presentations and training sessions, and we will link to Mary's full body of research today as well, so you can have a read through. But just to highlight some of the other ways that we'll see animals brought into that is really frequently a use of punishment. So again, like you see from Anne's quote, she hadn't made the dinner on time, and it was really, she was punished by using the animals in that. Jealousy as well, that again, they're giving that attention, that care and that love to something else that's not them. They also use pets to instill fear in the survivor, whether that's a fear of what's going to happen to the pet, should they leave them behind or should they try to leave. Or also, you know, if they're doing something to the pet, actually, they can quite easily then do that to them or do it to their children as well. And also something to ensure their compliance as well. So again, constantly just reverting to that threat and that fear and that control over people and their behavior. So finally, I'll just quickly highlight the impact of and how this abuse towards animals impacted people's decisions about leaving. So within the 94 households of participants that said that animals were abused by the perpetrator in Mary's study, 58 of those survey participants said that concerns about the welfare of animals stopped them from leaving the abusive relationship. So again, this is something we see absolutely every day on Lifeline. We'll see that if people feel like their only option is to give up their pet forever, and again, we know the bond that will have with people, We know the support they've been offering to that person through an extremely traumatic time. If they have to lose one more thing, which is going to be that pet, then that, quite often that's just too much to give up at that point. But also the other option that they might feel like they have is to leave them behind. And again, as you can imagine, the thought of maybe getting yourself to safety, but thinking actually your cat or dog is maybe in harm's way somewhere else is the worst feeling. And so you can imagine why that can be a reason that people will delay it, or they will in fact stay as well. There are two main themes really across participants' responses to the questions around sort of hope for support and things. And the first theme was that they really wanted a safe space for animals to escape to when they themselves fled. So that was really important to them, that actually if they were getting to safety, so were their animals. It may not be that that space was the same one as theirs, but that they were getting to safety as well. And the second theme that emerged was that the participants really wanted for their animals to be included in their safety plans as well. So again, that's something when we're working very closely with sort of frontline domestic abuse workers, we'll really emphasize that in our training to include the animals within that safety plan. Ultimately, if it's important to the survivor, then it should absolutely be important to those supporting them. And we should be hopefully trying to include them as much as possible within that process, because like we say, we know that leaving them behind with the perpetrator can, as we see on the graph here, cause people to return out of fear for what's going to happen to them or wanting to protect them as well. So if people are able to sort of get to that point and make that decision to leave, we will then hear from Amy now about some of the options they'll then have at that point.
Lovely, thank you, Natalie. So yes, if we're looking for anybody that might be supporting survivors or people accessing housing, homelessness accommodation, what are the options that are going to be available for a survivor if they own a pet? If they've taken that step to leave, which we know takes a huge amount of courage. There's so many barriers that may be in their way. We know on average it can take women 7 times to try and leave before they're able to fully leave for good. They finally got to that point and they're ready to leave. And they know, based on everything you've heard from Natalie, what could happen to their pets if they leave them behind, and that important bond that they've got with them. So they make that first step to call out to, say, a national domestic abuse helpline, to a local council, social work teams, and they are ready to make that step, but they're often immediately told, we can support you, we can house your children as well, but you can't bring your pets with you. And that might be where the conversation ends. You can't bring your pets with you. So many survivors at that point may say, okay, it's not worth it. At least if I'm home with my pet, I'm in that property, I can try and protect them. Leaving the pet behind is not worth it. We do know that the majority of refuges across the UK are not able to accept pets, and there's very valid reasons for that, where we've got shared children's spaces, shared living room, shared kitchen, having multiple different families, young children, babies, different dogs and cats coming in and out of that environment is not always going to be either the most practical for the survivors and the staff in that space, or also potentially the safest as well for the people and the children in that space as well. So we know there's lots of reasons why refuges in particular are not able to accept pets. We do see some more refuges that have self-contained properties that are now starting to accept pets, where it can be more safely managed. But on the whole, we know it's very, very limited. If you're going to refuge, you're often not going to be able to take your pets with you. So what are the options at that point if you're looking, okay, I've got my refuge space, I'm ready to move, where is the pet going to go? So it might be that they reach out to friends or family for the pet to stay with, but ultimately we know with domestic abuse comes a huge amount of isolation. Your social circle has been brought down to potentially nobody at all. It might be very difficult to reach out to anybody to ask them to help with your dog or your cat. But also there could be additional safety risks there. If the perpetrator knows that your local neighbour or local friend is caring, walking that dog in the local area, is that going to be the safest option for the dog or for your friend or family member as well? We might look at private boarding, kennels, catteries. For us on our pet fostering services, placements last anything between 6 to 9 months on average. that's going to be a huge cost to you if you're needing to place your pets into kennels categories for that amount of time. Especially with domestic abuse, a huge number of our clients have experienced economic abuse. They haven't got access to their own finances. There's been a large amount of coerced debt. Being able to fund that for that amount of time is going to be potentially challenging. And also we have to think about the animal welfare impacts as well of boarding animals for that period of time as well. It might be that actually the pets are permanently rehomed, but what we do know is the vast majority of people who call us desperately want to keep their pets. They do not want to give them up. They'd rather stay in the situation than give them up. And also within animal welfare, at the moment, we are seeing huge amounts of demand on all of the rescue services. So waiting lists are very long. It could be that you're told it could be a matter of months before you're able to actually bring your pets in for rehoming. So not always the easiest option, particularly in an emergency. And then also we might see pets left behind, and it may be that there's no other option to do that. But what we do know is within even 24 hours of that gap of the perpetrator having access to the animal when the survivor, the children have fled, that is where we are unfortunately going to see pets that do not make it out of that situation. And we have dealt with that on many occasions. And you can imagine the trauma when they finally got to that stage of reaching support, getting to safety, to hear or to know that that's what's happened to your animal, or even worse, sometimes not knowing what's happened to the animal, which can be really hard as well. So the other option that we may have, so we'll move on to the next slide, is to actually refer to specialist pet fostering services. So in the UK, there's currently 4 specialist services which operate under the Links Group. The Links Group is an organisation that raises awareness on the link between animal abuse and abuse to people. We are set by specific standards under this group, which makes sure that our services are safe for both our animals and our people that we're supporting as well. So we work alongside, obviously there's ourselves, Cats Protection Lifeline. We work very closely with Dogs Trust Freedom, which is the same service but for dogs. Refuge for Pets in Devon and Cornwall, which is led by Mary, whose research you've heard about today. And then Endeavour in the Northwest, who were the first domestic abuse service to set up a pet fostering service in 1997. Our goal is to expand and to ensure that there is a specialist pet fostering service no matter what area you're in. And last year we supported 728 victim survivors by fostering almost 1,000 animals between our 4 services. So you can see that the demand really is there. And some of the key parts of our services are just making sure that they're absolutely free and confidential to access. There's no contact between our clients and our foster carers, just to maintain safety on both sides. And we have lots of different procedures set up around some of the additional risks of sort of how we collect animals, where they're cared for. They're always moved out of area, and they're not advertised anywhere, obviously, around the kind of cats or dogs that we would be caring for. So just to talk you through briefly what it would look like if you were to refer to our service, and this is highlighting our cats at Cats Protection Lifeline, but ultimately it's very similar across the 4 services. So we'll receive a referral from either the victim survivor themselves or a support worker, housing officer, anybody that's working with them. We have our forms completed and we'll arrange the safe collection of the pets. They'll either move straight into a foster home or into a category environment for a short period of time and then out to foster. And then normally this part takes around 6 to 9 months. It can be a lot quicker. It can unfortunately be longer because of some of the challenges we are talking about today. But we will make sure that the survivor still feels connected to their pets, even though they're not physically with them, by updates, stories. One of our foster carers likes to draw little drawings of the cats while she's caring for them. So we'll make sure they can still feel that connection. And then we have the best part of all of our team's roles. They'll also often say the same thing. We'll get the phone call to say, I've just been given my new property, and they are just desperate to have the pet brought back to them immediately, which is ultimately what we are here for. It is the highlight of all of our weeks, I think, when we are returning. And just to talk a little bit around the importance of together. So we've heard around the relationship that survivors will have with their animals, and this is true for all of us. We have seen evidence has shown that pets have been found to improve our mood, our well-being, lower those levels of anxiety and depression, and reduce feelings of isolation and loneliness. And also research will show that during times of change or when exposed to difficult events, so that could be experiencing domestic abuse, experiencing homelessness, that pets can actually pets can actually play a role at increasing owners' resilience as well. So really important. And in our own survey at Cats Protection, alongside the Mental Health Foundation, we found that 76% of people said they could cope better with life thanks to the company of the pet. We know that our pets provide us with companionship, love, a source of consistency. So really, this is not just an animal welfare issue, even though we are often talking about it within the animal welfare charities, but this is essential considerations for the well-being of people too. And when we look at our survivors as well, what we know is that reuniting back with the pet or maintaining that bond with the pet is absolutely vital for that ongoing recovery and resettlement. It reduces that further trauma of having to leave animals behind, not knowing what's happened to them, to the survivors and to the children in the home, who have often gone through so much change and uncertainty. But what we do know is the lack of pet-friendly properties is one of the most common reasons for our pets not being able to be reunited at the end of the fostering period. So once we've cared for them for 6 to 9 months, survivors experiencing challenges being rehoused and challenges being rehoused with pet-friendly properties is one of our biggest ones. So what can we do together to make sure that we're supporting survivors and their pets as best as we can? So we need to challenge those blanket bans on pets. We've heard about that evidence from Tom this morning around this, but what we often hear is from local authorities that will say, we've got a blanket ban, we will not accept pets in any of our temporary accommodation. So that means for anybody experiencing domestic abuse, accessing homelessness accommodation, it means that in many cases you're going to be asked to be giving up your pet. We really want to empathise and understand that human-animal bond, so recognise the trauma of the trauma that can be brought with just telling somebody to give up their pet. Yes, we'll try and support you, but you need to rehome your animal. That sentence alone can be hugely, hugely damaging to pet owners, especially when they are already going through so much and have lost so much as well. But taking that time to, again, for survivors to refer to the specialist pet fostering services, get to know your local teams. We're always happy to come in to deliver talks, to talk through the services. And consider the pet CVs and the references, as you've heard from Alice today as well. So supporting people to develop those pet CVs and considering them when they get put in front of you as well, recognising the importance of that pet to these people. And just have a look, familiarise yourselves with those Purrfect landlord scheme at Cats Protection, the support available with developing pet policies. And ultimately just remember that for many people, the pet is considered a vital family member as well. And just really lastly, we can't really end without acknowledging our foster carers, because we couldn't run this service without our incredible foster carers who open their homes and hearts to people that are experiencing domestic abuse and to their pets. So they care for pets in their own homes. It's totally confidential. They don't know anything about the owner of the cat, but they'll provide them that love and care and help them settle in until they can be reunited with their family. So really good opportunity for anybody that would like the benefits that come with a pet, but not the long-term commitment and not the financial impact as well, because we cover all vet costs, all food costs, and bring the pet directly to you as well. And again, just touching back on those benefits, for us on Lifeline, our foster carers who care for cats said that fostering with us, 96% said fostering a cat with us has a positive impact on their well-being and mental health. So it's just really showing that all-round impact, positive impact that pets can have. Lovely. I know, again, we mentioned around that sort of content warning at the start, but just to check in again on that, we know some of the content is hard to hear, but there is support available as well through National Domestic Abuse Helpline and also the Men's Advice Line too. So thank you very much. And I think I will hand back to Kelly now and we will look at some questions.
My goodness, honestly, just so much information in that. And I think just the crossover with Tom's research as well, honestly, it's just such an eye-opener. I just think that there's just so much to think about, and I'm still thinking about it now. And I just think kind of my work at addressing domestic abuse, talking to housing providers all of the time about helping them create their domestic abuse policy, and just thinking about including that kind of the lifeline and the key organisations to support, looking at barriers to leaving and all of that, and making sure. So I will take as an action, obviously, from this, that I will make sure that I make those references everywhere I go. And I hope that other people will take kind of actions into their work as well. That both presentations were just such eye openers, and thank you both presenter panels for sharing their knowledge and expertise. I just wanted, before we get on to a question, I just wanted to highlight that Elizabeth has come in and said the John Chadwick pet policy should be introduced by all boroughs, and she said that John Chadwick pet policy to prevent vulnerable pet owners from being separated by their pets. And I think that was Maidstone Borough Council. So I hadn't heard of that, so I'll certainly be having a look at that in more detail as well. And then she said pet owners are allowed to refuse non-pet friendly housing without making themselves intentionally homeless. So hopefully that'll be something that we can all take away from that. So I'm just going to move on to the first question.
If I just come in quickly on that, Kelly.
Thank you for
bringing that up, Kelly. That's something that I've recently spoken to the Scottish Government about in reference to their housing bill, because their housing bill introduces a right for private tenants and also social tenants to keep pets. We said that under the we would like the John Chadwick housing policy to be introduced across the UK, so also across all local authorities in Scotland as well, and this is something that they're looking into. So thank you for bringing it up, because I think that's a really important policy, and it's so sad what happened to John, but I think his legacy is really important that we remember it.
Yeah, that's excellent, brilliant. And Gareth has just added in the chat, anyone who's interested in fostering, you can find out more here. I don't know about you, but I am definitely interested. So thank you for that. Just moving on to one of the questions as well. We've got, let me have a look. Luciana, who said, thank you for these amazing talks. As Amy said, we also found in our qualitative study that some non-pet friendly landlords just don't want to accept pets. As many said, it's my property, I don't want pets in there, including some saying they were discussing about how to make sure their properties would be classified as not appropriate for having pets. And so Luciana's question is, I would just like to ask, what do you think could be done about these landlords that just don't want to accept? Is Luciana's question. So I don't know if we want to maybe come to Tom first, and then we'll move on to the cats protection panel.
Thank you, Kelly. I think that's a really interesting question. I think we hear that those sort of terms about benefit claims, people claiming universal credit, families with children as well. But I know there's in the origins of the Renters Reform Bill, there was supposed to be protections around the restrictions on families and children as well, which never really got picked up either. I think there isn't much that can be done unless you have that sort of stick as well in terms of appropriate legislation that says you can't refuse pets. I think landlords, well, those sort of landlords are always going to be looking for the loophole. It's about changing that broader culture and the values, moving from it's their property, they get to choose what happens, to they're a business providing property out, and it's then the homeowner or the renter who owns that property for that period of time with that tenancy, and gets to choose what they do within that property. So I think it's about changing those values more broadly and using the stick of the legislation to push them in that direction as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you talked at the beginning about kind of changing that, I suppose hearts and minds, for want of a better term, but I also thought it was interesting when you talked about maybe the financial incentives around kind of those tenancies being sustained for longer, and that kind of link to the community. People feeling part of a community are less likely to obviously give up that tenancy. So hopefully that would influence, if we could share your research widely, that would hopefully start that change. And I'll come now because I know that the Cats Protection Panel, as I'm calling you for ease, or as opposed to Amy, Alice and Natalie, talked about kind of when you first started talking about that, mirroring what Tom said about that kind of changing the hearts and minds around this. So do you want to respond to the question asked?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Tom says. You kind of need to have some legislation in place. We've done a lot of work speaking with landlord associations, we've been to housing shows, and I think going back again to what Tom said in his presentation about there needs to be a cultural change. So I think if you can, as we're doing, trying to persuade landlord associations to say, well, if you're in favour of keeping pets, that will kind of persuade some more people. In our survey with Dogs Trust, the 2021 survey, which I mentioned, we did ask tenants and landlords which ways that would persuade them to allow pets. And one of them was to include a professional clean at the end of a tenancy. And tenants said, well, the majority of tenants said that if their cat or dog did cause any damage, they'd be willing to pay for any of this damage. So again, it backs up a lot of what Tom was saying in his survey findings. So I think it's just talking to landlords and saying, what are the reasons why you aren't allowing pets? Can we have this open dialogue? And we also say at Cats Protection, there is a cat for every property. So whenever anyone says, oh, you shouldn't have a cat in this property, so we have sometimes cats that come into our care who are house cats. So if you do have a small house that you don't have a garden, that's fine, we can find a cat for you. Equally, if you've got a large house, we've got a cat for you. So yeah, we don't think that it's appropriate to say this house isn't appropriate for a cat. We would challenge that as well.
Excellent. Amy and Natalie, did you want to add anything?
I would just follow on from exactly what Alice has said, is sort of having that opportunity to challenge. And I think on sort of a frontline level, when we're working directly with survivors that are trying to access housing, they will be really frequently just told no pets, no discussion, and it needs us to step in and have those conversations and actually challenge. Can we understand why? Can we explore what is the property type? And having that opportunity. And sometimes we've had an experience of housing officers then actually asking landlords, and they said, oh, actually that's fine, we say no pets, but actually in this case that's fine. So it's actually having the conversation and exploring why. And in a previous role, I worked at Dogs Trust managing the Freedom Project, so the dog equivalent of Lifeline. And I do remember one situation where we'd had the dog for a very long time, and she was desperate to be reunited, and she'd been finally offered a property. And again, it was no pets. Landlord was adamant, and we offered, can we have a conversation with the landlord and sort of chat it through? And when I spoke to the landlord, she said, oh, I was just really worried about a dog being in that property, and I wasn't sure whether the welfare needs would be met, and I was just concerned for the dog, really. And we were able to have that conversation and say, actually, it's very similar to the home that the dog's been fostered in. They'll have that ongoing support from the pet fostering services even after reunited. If it doesn't work out, we're here for support. And actually got it all working, and the landlord promised that when one of their larger properties came up, they would move them over. So it was actually that there is a lot of positive outcomes that can be had, but it does feel like for the survivors themselves, I wish that we didn't need to step in and advocate for them. I wish that they were able to have those conversations themselves and just be supported into that pet-friendly accommodation.
Yeah. Natalie, did you want to add anything?
I will really just echo what Amy has said, really, that, yeah, I
Yeah.
think similar. It's just, I think when people really, a lot of the clients that we're supporting at that point are dealing with so many different agencies, so many different professionals, that, yeah, really it's difficult if the onus is on them to be so proactively sort of like challenging themselves when actually they're dealing with a lot. And if a professional is telling you one thing, then they're going to feel like that's maybe the answer. So again, I think, yeah, just making sure it's more of an open conversation, and that actually, like we've all said, like those blanket no's just don't actually really reflect like animals as individuals, which is, I think, how we're all understanding them better these days.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just looking at it from, say, a housing options point of view, people who assess cases of homelessness and looking at, you know, those landlords who might be on their list and having those conversations. And you know, I know that lots of local authorities would be paying a bond or a deposit and all of those things. So just I suppose there's something that could be done there. And I think what you were talking about kind of changing that culture and changing kind of the conversation. I suppose we've all got a role where we can actually, from today, with all of your expertise, we can kind of all take that forward, hopefully, and support the work that you do around this. Definitely. And with somebody's raised a hand, but could you just pop your question in the Q&A, and then we'll kind of get through it that way? That would be great. Thank you. Just having a look, somebody else has put something in the chat, who's just talked about Society for Companion Animal Studies, funded research led by Dr. Luciana de Assis at University of Lincoln, chimes with a lot of these findings, and she's popped in a leaflet to support landlords. Oh, that would be so helpful, and kind of to have those conversations. I also thought as well, when you talked at the beginning about, I keep wanting to say cat passport, but cat CV, I love that term. I'm going to have to use it at least 4 times today and just random conversations. So yeah, I just think it's so interesting, and it makes so much sense when you talk about actually the pet and the person, and humanizing the person, but also kind of making that pet kind of not just a pet. It's kind of it's really important to know about that. So I think that hopefully, certainly, and I'll be talking about that to all of the housing providers that I work with. I just think that's just really kind of changes the conversation, doesn't it, really? So, right, I'm just going to see if we've got any further questions. Any further questions on anything? Oh, we've got a point here. What would be your recommendations when enforcing irresponsible pet ownership? So if I can come to cat protection first. Whoever wants to answer from there.
Alice, do you want to answer, or do you want me to?
Yes, do you want to go first on this
Yeah,
one?
I think it's something probably that gets asked quite a lot, and I think that's some of the biggest concerns when we are working with housing providers to bring pets into properties. I would say, and Alice, feel free to jump in, but ultimately for anything like that, it's the same as any other issues with tenancy breaches or antisocial behaviour or anything like that. So really it would be a matter in relation to the housing process, or following whatever processes you would normally have in place. But also, just if we're looking at also the animal welfare issue, working really closely with local animal welfare charities, working and building partnerships with the RSPCA, and just really informing yourself on sort of the welfare considerations for animals, what needs to be provided. But also a really good way of doing that is to have those pet policies in place already, because like Alice mentioned, you can outline what it looks like, what good animal welfare is, what you're expecting from tenants, and that kind of thing. So always, I think, good to go in on that preventative level, and then ultimately you may, if needed, have to go down routes in relation to tenancy. But it's, in our experience, it's definitely the lower end of the spectrum that you may see that coming up.
Excellent, thank you. Tom, did you want to come in? Oh, sorry, Alice, were you going to come in there?
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just quickly add to what Amy said, because she said it's perfect. But we've also done surveys where we found that cats don't cause a lot of damage, but also a lot of nuisance to neighbours, but also echoing what Amy said, so our community engagement officers, they work very closely with housing providers. So we find that sometimes people who live in social housing, they might not have cat carriers. And then this might create problems of irresponsible pet ownership where they don't take them to the vet. So they might get problems with, how I mentioned, neutering, you have unwanted pregnancies, and then before you know it, you've got lots of kittens. So we come in sometimes with cat carriers and we say, we've got a cat carrier, we can help you take them to the vets. Or we sometimes do training days with housing providers and we say, let us teach you how to look after your pet so you can flea them and then you don't have infestations within your property and stuff like that. So it's just a bit of an education piece. And also within our Purrfect Landlord campaign, this is what we try and do with tenants as well. So it's teaching people to be responsible tenants. So that's what we're calling for, is responsible tenants to be given the right to keep pets. So it's a two-way street, we say. So it's also letting landlords be able to accept responsible tenants.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Tom, did you want to come in on any points there?
Yeah, well, I'd echo the points made by Amy and Alice there. I think there's a broader sort of conception in sort of the property sector around, what is the responsibility of landlords? Should they be enforcing who is or isn't a responsible pet owner? I think that responsibility lies with others. The landlord should be there about providing good quality housing, not making choices over who or doesn't have the opportunity to have a pet. And then that also leads into the same as I was saying about, the restrictions on children. Are we then going to be saying, oh, you're an irresponsible parent, you can't live here? Is those sort of same notions within the property sector that I think need challenging as well. So I think that, as I was saying at the start, it's about, the ability and freedom to have a pet is crucial in people feeling at home in the property. And it's about that freedom and ability to do that. And I don't think it's up to the landlord to be the one who makes that choice on that freedom and ability. It should be up to others outside of that situation. I think the landlord does have a role to play where things are breaking down, to be able to signpost to the relevant organisations.
Okay, thank you for that. Excellent. Just thinking if we've got any further questions. There's lots of information in the chat and various links. So I'm just thinking from my point of view, just looking at the work of the Collaborative Centre for Housing Evidence, that's such a mouthful, CAT, as part of their diversity, equity and inclusion work. And just, the topic today has been around sharing stories and good practice about the work taking place to support marginalised communities. And I think that both presentations have done that really well. And I think hopefully that we will kind of take the learning forward from this. And if I can ask everybody who is on the webinar today to kind of share this information, do what we can, and obviously listening to both sets of speakers talking about kind of that change in culture and changing that conversation. So I think we've all got a role to play in that, and just knowing that, this really feeds back into kind of what CASH is all about challenging those kind of people marginalised. And I think what we've heard today is the difference that pets can make to from a financial point of view, from a private landlord's point of view, from the well-being point of view, from the community kind of point of view as well. But looking at all of the support that's available from cat protection, and just looking at the map that you showed of all of the services that are available, I think that's going to be really useful for people going forward, definitely. And I certainly know, I remember I think it was my second patch as a housing officer, having to, one of the most horrendous things, and it was nearly 30 years ago now, and it still stays with me, having to find a cat that had been killed by a perpetrator because the victim survivor left And so that's kind of stayed with me in my whole housing career, that happened. So if we can do anything to kind of make that difference and inform ourselves and educate ourselves and you know that we can make a difference, I think that would be ideal. I can see that Gareth has added a lot of information in there. And Gareth, are you going to be adding all of this information in? Everyone's email inbox is going to be totally crashed with all of this information. But hopefully, Gareth, are you going to send all of this information along with the slides as well?
I will, yeah. I will send a full package with links to everything that we've mentioned. I'll also reference all the links from the work that other people have flagged through the chat, which is great. So thank you everyone for doing that. And I've also just popped my email into the chat function. So if people do want to find out more or want introductions to any of the speakers or to yourself, Kelly, I'm very happy to do that. And as you've very kindly kind of highlighted, the work that we're doing, it very much is about playing that role in connecting people who are doing the frontline work as well as the research and everything, kind of making those connections. So yeah, very happy.
Thank you. Brilliant. And so obviously, any further questions before I can see that? Thanks very much for this session. It's been really interesting and helpful. We've had some kind of thumbs up and applause as well for the speakers today, who've been absolutely brilliant. Yes, we've got even more coming in as well. So obviously it's gone down very well today. I also just want to thank obviously Gareth for obviously considering this as a topic for the webinar today. As I say, really ties in with the work that Gareth and the team are doing, which is just amazing. So please do have a look on the website, keep informed about all of the work that Gareth and the team are doing. I wanted to give a massive thank you to Glenn Corrigan as well, who's organised all of the links and kept us right on everything today as well. And I think if we've got no further questions, we've just got more applause coming as well. So we've got no further questions. We've got actually going to end beforehand. So I would say that if you can, please circulate as much information as possible. As we've heard from all of the speakers today, we need to change this culture and we need to change the conversations. We've all got a role to play in that. So I certainly will be doing that. We've now got hearts coming up as well as applause as well. So thank you very much. And we've got Luciana said, thank you very much. It was brilliant and very informative. So thank you again to all of our speakers, Alice, Amy, Tom and Natalie, and to Gareth and Glenn as well for putting everything together. So thank you so much, everybody. Okay.
Thank you to you, Kelly, as well for your time and for chairing it so excellently. So we're really grateful to have you as part of this work as well.
It's a pleasure. So thank you, everybody. And we've now got 7 minutes back on our day to read through some of this stuff and decide what we're going to do today to make a difference. So enjoy your day, everybody. Thank you so much.